programs and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio. I am your host, Diamond, from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, joined once again by my lovely partner and co-host, Leah Shaper.
Hello.
Welcome, folks, out in Radio Land. Today we're going to have a great show. Who wouldn't love a show that's titled Ancient Lost Cities? Now,
Always
these
interesting.
Ancient Lost Cities in Plain Sight should actually be the title of the show, because these have all recently been revealed through the use of Lidar. Now, we're going to cover two angles from this. I'm going to start from the very beginning, when these cities were first discovered. Did you know that in 1541, some dude got lost in the Amazon, went down the wrong river, with tons of men, like hundreds of guys. There was like a mutiny and everyone was about to revolt. So he's like, all right, we'll just keep going downstream. And they ended up in the Amazon River for the first time. Europeans were in the Amazon River in 1541. And when they returned, they made it all the way down and out of the mouth, back into the ocean. When they returned back home, they had fantastic stories of cities that were miles wide with giant highways and on and on. And they were heroes. Well, though that same group went back down into the Amazon because they became heroes. They got more money, another ship. They went there and they couldn't find the Amazon again. And the guy died in the Amazon basin without ever finding the river ever again.
Are you talking about Francisco de Orellana?
Yeah, that's the first guy. Yep.
Yeah. Right.
Let me
So he
share
comes
that.
back with all of these stories about
There he
these
is.
great civilizations that he found, and everybody thinks that he's just making stuff up. But he wasn't. He was telling the truth.
Can you see the screen now?
Yes, now I can. There he is.
Okay. Yeah. So this was in April of 1541 that they discovered these cities. And because that people went back and they never found anything. And so it takes a while to go back. It's not like you go back next month. You know, it takes years to assemble these groups. And they went back and they never found anything. So all the way back then in the 1500s, they concluded he was a liar. And then he just made it all up.
Yeah. Which makes me think about, there's other stories like this of explorers who go to South America and then they find like the land of gold and all of that, right? And we say now that these people were just making stuff up because nobody ever found what the explorers were talking about. So, but maybe they were telling the truth as well.
Yeah, and in fact, the truth is that many of these cities were not made of stone, like the Mayan pyramids and the Olmec pyramids and the Aztec pyramids. Those are all made of stone because they had stone readily available in the area. And these areas of the Amazon, it's mud. It's mud and rivers and floodplains. So they did build these cities, but they built them out of dirt. So if you went back in the 1800s or 1900s and there was no one there, the cities would have pretty much eroded into mud hills.
Well, and they would have been completely covered in vegetation and you would never see anything unless you knew what to look for.
Yeah, and what we know now is that at this time, the late 1500s or the mid 1500s was the end of all of these cities. The empires had ended. So they probably had very low populations, which is why the explorers weren't murdered by like huge hordes of angry natives. They were probably back to hunter-gatherer, and they're just living in these giant cities that have been all but abandoned, which made it even more fantastical. So you're there and there's very few people and you're like, what is this?
Yeah. Well, and it's such a long time, right? Like this one discovery that rediscovery, I should say, that we're going to talk about. This civilization was probably gone by about 600. So, 1540 at that point, that's a long time after.
Yeah, we're gonna go out on a limb here by the end of the show and make more connections with the Chacoan people and some of these studies that are coming out from Lidar.
Mm-hmm.
Here is a really famous example of some of the Lidar reveals that these massive complexes that were hiding in plain sight, with dozens of pyramids, plazas, elevated plazas, highways, causeways, canals. It goes on and on. And if you were to go here where this Lidar picked images, it would just be jungle. You really wouldn't see any of this.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, I want to talk about those roads and canals later and when we get into this in more detail.
Yeah, because I pulled up a bunch of stuff on that. So that's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
So in the last 15 years, lasers have revealed at least 6 ancient civilizations that were hiding in plain sight. We have the Maya pyramidal structures in the Yucatan. Now, if you notice this is literally surrounded by marsh. And this is just an uplift here. And they created a massive complex, ceremonial complex, cities, pyramids, plazas. So there's residential areas. There's, everything here. It's a full city.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big reveal in the Yucatan. Then there was a 2,000-year-old Mayan civilization discovered in northern Guatemala. This is fantastic because, again, it has dozens of pyramids, would have taken tens of thousands of people to build. And moreover, all of these cities, now, as they're revealing these cities one after another, they're also figuring out that some of them are connected with highways that go hundreds of miles through the jungle.
Yeah.
We've got nearly 500 long-lost Maya and Olmec ceremonial sites in the Yucatan that was discovered. Here's some LiDAR pictures. We've got 61,480 previously unknown structures hidden in the dense Guatemalan jungle as well. And more recent archaeological studies on earthworks, which these earthworks connect this culture directly to the Hopewell, which is in Ohio at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow the people in Ohio were doing similar things that they're doing here in Ecuador in the Amazon rainforest. That's insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that means two things. Either they had cell phones or they were aware of each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what was going
on.
on.
And we'll get into this, but just the existence of roads that seems to connect some of these cities would obviously indicate there's tons of evidence of trade, and then the roads suggest quite a lot that obviously these people were in contact with each other.
Yeah, and it goes on and on. A wide-ranging ancient civilization buried in the Bolivian Amazon. So this was actually all discovered because it didn't have time to get grown over like it is now, where we have to use LiDAR. Hundreds of years ago, they couldn't re-find it, so they said he was a quack. And then we never went back, is basically what happened.
Yeah.
Everyone lost interest. And so
and
now,
this is surprising in another way too, right? Just like from the perspective of the evolution of Western civilization, right? Like it seems like the attitude in Europe was, we're the civilized people and everybody else is a bunch of savages. So it's probably very easy to discount Oriana,
Yeah. Yeah. Especially back then.
Yeah.
So take a look at the extent of what the paper we're about to discuss. It was published 2 days ago. The title is 2,000 Years of Garden Urbanism in the Upper Amazon. And that should strike you for a number of things. The word urbanism and gardening. It's interesting how this society was a permaculture society, providing everything it needed along a single causeway where you could walk down and go get Jimmy's apples and then probably walk another quarter mile and they were fish or God knows what they were doing here. It's so extensive and so well laid out and planned. It's better than any type of urban planning that we do today. So this is kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And the small area here in Ecuador, guess what? All of this urban planning is along a river, which makes sense because that's what we do today. But the extent of it, take a look at the scale down here is 2 miles in about an inch. So we're talking about, 50 square miles of a small civilization, just one of many that we just showed you that are being discovered by LIDAR. If you look up at the Ecuador map, it's just this tiny square on the river.
Yeah.
And to assume that this is an outlier from what we know is now incorrect. These cities were everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like 20 years ago, with what they had discovered with the existing pyramids that we know of and like the Yucatan, etc., they're estimating that maybe the Maya and the Olmec cultures, maybe there were tens of thousands of people here in Central and Southern America. Mm-hmm. But what's being revealed is that there were 100,000 people right here in this town in Ecuador.
Yeah.
And then if we add it up, this is millions of people living in this region 2,000 years ago.
Yeah. We run into the same thing, right? When we look at the desert Southwest, the claim is always a fairly low number of people in a particular area. But if that really only works if you're actually looking at the preserved and what's the word I'm looking for? Whatever, I can't think of the word, the preserved areas that we recognize historically. But if you start looking around, then you start seeing that other people have been living here for extended periods of time, and they're in huge numbers, right? In the Southwest, you see cave dwellings, but then you start looking around and you realize that they're everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah. And you're like, there have to be millions of people here.
And it's in his hospitable area. So how many people are in the hospitable areas?
Right.
And once again, the majority of the culture living in Central, South, and North America 2,000 years ago, they're building their structures with dirt.
Yeah.
They're not building it with stone. Very few people had access to stone, and if they did, then they built it with stone. Mm-hmm. It was far easier for the mound builders to use dirt because they're living in a rainforest in the eastern U.S. It rains all the time, and there's lots of dirt.
Yeah.
So that's kind of fascinating. And we'll get to it in a moment. Just look at how this is all, look at this layout here. It's insane. It's like there's main highways like I-95 that connects the major hubs. There's smaller roads that go out to other regions for other things. Maybe there are like more residential areas out here. Mm-hmm. So the LIDAR technology in this particular study found 6,000 rectangular platforms measuring 66 feet by 33 feet and 2 to 3 meters high. Mm-hmm. What do you think that is? Is that the standard foundation for your house?
That's what I'm thinking. And this kind of ties into the road thing I'm thinking about. Like, you have to consider, like, as you just mentioned, this is a rainforest area. There's a lot of water here, right? And in this paper that just came out, they are talking about some of their all of their agricultural fields have drainage systems, and that's very evident. And so you would think that if you're going to build a house, you probably need to get it out of the way of water. So having it on a platform makes a lot of sense. Now, the thing about the roads that's kind of driving me crazy here. So I'm reading the description of all of these different kinds of roads that they're talking about. There's also canals that they mention. But here's the problem. A lot of the road types are actually dug, like they're 2 to 3 meters down. And I'm thinking to myself, if this is a rainforest area, if you dug your road down into the ground, it's going to fill up with water. Don't you think?
Yeah, and in fact, I agree with you. A lot of the misinterpretation, I read some other sources. They're alluding to the presence of canals along the sides of some of the roads.
Well, because there are some elevated roads, right?
Yeah,
and in
while
that
other
case,
roads are dug in, so they may be mixing up a really advanced network of canals.
Well, so here's what they say. They say that they make the distinction between roads and canals based on where they go. So if a dug road goes to what appears to be the site of a building, a big platform, a larger sort of civic building site that would seem to be there, then they call it a road. But I'm thinking that what's actually going on is that their roads are canals that they're getting around by boat.
Absolutely. Because
Right,
how
because-
easy would it be to paddle in a straight line a mile? It would go
Right.
very quickly.
This makes way, way more sense. I mean, we see like dug canals and stuff in the Southwest all the time, which makes sense because you need to manage water because there's not much of it. So you want to capture as much of it as you can. But I don't think it's any different here. It's just kind of in a different way. In this way, you're localizing the water so that it's not inundating your community, and then you're using it to get around. And there are elevated roadways, like as you just mentioned, that have ditches on either side, which also makes sense. It's just like our roads here out in rural, middle of nowhere, California, Colorado, where, what am I saying? Where our roads are, they're kind of elevated and rounded off so that the water flows off of them. And then there's a ditch on either side for water management.
Yeah. And if you think about it, there's really no need for wheeled carts or anything. How stupid would you be to pull a cart with a wheel with heavy loads on it when you could simply load these heavy loads into a reed canoe and go paddle in a straight line to where you need to take it?
Well, not only that, but in this climate, if you have a cart with wheels loaded with heavy stuff in a wet area, you're going to get stuck in the mud. So why would you even have that kind of transportation?
So here, let's run over the abstract. A dense system of pre-Hispanic urban centers. That's amazing. A dense system of urban centers has been found in the upper valley of the Amazon, Ecuador.
It's the Upano Valley.
Yeah. Maybe I bet you it's Upano.
Upano, yeah, that would be probably the better pronunciation.
In the eastern foothills of the Andes. Now, this is just evidence that now what's being revealed from Lidar throughout Central America and now South America is that, can you imagine in 10 years how many more cities we're going to have discovered?
I know.
And so the funny thing is that all of these are overlapping around 2,000 years ago. And with the way archaeology has gone, we now have Mayans and Aztecs and Olmecs. And I think that there may be a little bit more overlap than they lead on here. Now, clearly, the Aztecs are different looking people than the Maya.
Mm-hmm.
But, the people that live in New England look different than the people that live in Mexico.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's going to be different types of people in different regions, especially from what we know now, that the narrative that humans got here, 13,000 years ago is incorrect.
Yeah.
So we've had groups during the Ice Age migrating from Siberia across a very fertile area there in Beringia. And so how many different groups are now in America during the Holocene? There could have been several different, and we know that there are. And so they're all going to go where it's easy to live. So the initial large populations are where? In the tropical region.
Yeah.
That's Central and South America.
Yeah.
Because it's literally, they get down there and there's all kind of animals and plants. It rains all the time.
It's warmer.
You don't have to worry. It's warm. You don't have to wear that many clothes.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting. The logic takes you to what we're discovering right now.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Let's get on with this. Where are we here? So the LiDAR analysis has revealed an anthropized landscape. So that means that the landscape has been completely changed by people.
Yes.
There are clusters of monumental platforms, plazas, and streets following a specific pattern intertwined with an extensive agricultural drainages and terraces, as well as wide straight roads running over great distances. Archaeological excavations date the occupation from around 500 BCE to between 300 and 600 CE. And the most notable landscape feature is the complex road system extending over tens of kilometers, connecting the different urban centers, thus creating a regional scale network. Now, such extensive early development in the upper Amazon is comparable to similar Mayan urban systems recently highlighted in Mexico and Guatemala that we just showed you those other LiDAR studies.
I kept wondering too, if these road systems in this area are in any way related to the road systems that you see coming out of Chaco Canyon. Granted, in a completely different kind of climate, a very dry one, but it's similar sounding in the sense that you have these dug roads that are extremely straight. I mean, one may be canals in this part of the world and the other one may not be, but it is a very similar structure.
The difference between the Chaco roads and these roads is the Chacoan roads all converge on the central hub of Chaco.
Right.
And they radiate out. When you look at this, these LiDAR images here with the roads laid on, it looks like a regular city in a grid.
Yeah.
So these clearly were. And
this is for getting around locally, right? This is from getting from community to community, whereas the Chaco roads seem to be more about long distance travel.
Yeah, but if you don't have vehicles or carts, why do you need these roads?
That's right, exactly.
There is something.
Which again, I think that the canal idea makes way more sense here, you know?
Yeah, I would agree with you there. Yeah, let's look at some more of the figures here. So here we are zoomed in a little bit, and you can see the LiDAR imaging on the right here, and then they drew it out here so it's much more obvious. If you have this extensive amount of canals connecting directly to the river, then clearly those roads that are dug are not going to be dry.
No. They even talk about these quote unquote dug footpaths, and they say they regularly end with a descent into one of the gullies or quebradas, which is like a mountain stream or ravine that spread on the Upanu alluvial terrace and come out of the same gully a few hundred meters further on. So this is draining water into the gullies. It's not a footpath. Why would a footpath go into a gully and come out the other side? That doesn't make any sense. This is water management.
It's drainage, similar to the drainage out here at Sankawi.
Yeah.
Now look at this from far back here. Look at the extent of this grid pattern.
Yeah.
It's absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Earth platform. Go ahead.
I just said it's a huge area.
Yeah, and this is just a little tiny sliver in the center of Ecuador. So let's try to bring it all together with the Chaco roads. Here is a picture. You can't see it, but if you rewatch tonight on Magnetic Reversal News, you'll be able to see everything we're looking at. So here's one of those Chaco roads. Now, they say that they're perfectly straight and blah, blah. No, they're not. Here, you can see it's not straight.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of straight.
I mean, they do go extremely straight for long stretches, but yeah, it's not perfect.
And let's pull it up. There it is. Let's get rid of this. So the Chaco roads, for the most part, all spoke away from the main Chetroquetal, Pueblo Alto region in Chaco Canyon. But they don't, this is kind of blown up within the canyon itself. So there's more of a network here within the canyon, similar to what we saw there, like a grid.
Right.
And they claim that these roads end nowhere. But there might have been something there.
That's a regular mystery, right, about the Chaco roads, is that there's a bunch of roads that don't seem to go to any particular destination. But yeah, I would argue that we just haven't discovered what the destination was.
Yeah, or it was made of dirt and wood, and it's no longer there.
Right, that could also be the case.
Or it was so amazing that someone took it.
Right.
Because all of this stuff has been pillaged.
Yeah.
Now, what's really interesting here, if you look at the Chaco roads, the longest road that goes out here to the northwest goes directly to the forest where all of the timbers in Chaco came from.
Well, what do you know?
It's right there where I'm pointing.
And in this situation, an actual road makes way more sense, right? Because it's dry. You're trying to transport all of these forestry products. So maybe you've got like a roller system or something. And a lot of these roads are really wide. So it makes even more sense in that respect.
And the width needs to be wide. If you're using rollers, you need like 12, 15-foot trees to lie down there to push the stuff along.
Right.
There's no evidence that any of the timbers were drug.
Yes, I was about to say
they
that.
were above the ground. So these Chaco roads, and here's what's interesting. Nobody knows. Nobody has an answer. I mean, clearly this road that went to the forest was so they could bring the 50,000 timbers into the canyon.
Mm-hmm.
There also a road that goes to the south that also goes to an area where some of the timbers came from. So the roads are to take you to the areas which are important to your survival.
Mm-hmm.
And this culture lasted for hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it started flourishing maybe the peak was between 900 and 1150, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
With 1150 being this super peak where the most people are inhabiting most of these areas. And when within 100 years of 1150, almost everyone's gone.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting.
I mean, when you look at this map, like it really is no different than looking at a map of a modern city in a way, in terms of the roads, right? If you have any modern city, you're always going to have a bunch of roads that lead away from the central point. So it's really no different.
Exactly. We were recently here. I would implore anyone who can get out to Chaco Canyon to go there.
Bring
Now,
a four-wheel drive vehicle.
Oh, yeah. Now, you do get a very ominous feeling when you're there, and there are many native tribes that call this place the crying place or the dying place.
Yep.
And a lot of the archaeologists were wondering why no one went back there to live there. Well, if it is a nightmare, the history that occurred there, there would be no reason to go back there.
Yeah. Yeah.
It'd be like opening a pizza place using a Holocaust oven. You know, it's like, it's not happening.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and there have been theories too, because of all of these roads, that Chaco was like some kind of central hub or an area of trade. And I mean, obviously they did trade stuff because they had things in Chaco like macaw feathers, etc., that would not be found here normally. But I again, like, I think the roads just look like what you would do with any major city, and given the history as told by other Native American tribes, and calling this the place of crying. That's the Navajo. That's what Chaco means in Navajo. Would suggest that that's not the case at all. That something terrible was happening here, and people chose to avoid it rather.
Yeah, and so the idea is, and the legend of the gambler is that a very powerful group or person or entity came up from the south and subjugated everyone in this area. He literally gambled and won everything from all of the local tribes, subjugating them all into slavery and able to build these gigantic complexes. Now, listen to this. One of the theories of the Chaco roads is military. It's fascinating. The purpose of the Chaco roads was for the military, the Chacoan military. A good infrastructure of roadways would be invaluable for quick military response. And if you're subjugating all the people, all the way up to Aztec and back down south, wherever you've got them in these great houses, and something goes wrong, you need to get there quickly, wouldn't you? It's kind of, and it also, having the presence of the roads, you would know that there's a direct connection to the scary rulers at the center, and they could come out anytime. Yeah. So it may be a way to keep you in line.
Interesting.
It says here the roads may be used to advance the Chacoan military on their agriculturally rich neighbors. It's to keep them in line, to make sure that they're not taking more. And the great houses would have been used as barracks or headquarters for local agents, or maybe even prisons to keep the people there. If you control all the food and you're the one that has to give the people the food, they have to do what you say or you starve.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because one of the mysteries of Chaco is that there's not a lot of evidence for large numbers of people actually like living here. But if the great houses are being used as barracks, you might be able to assume that the living is somewhat temporary, right? Because the military is sort of on the move a lot of the time. And the other thing about this that sort of makes some sense is, like, This is not a part of the world with a lot of natural resources, especially in the agricultural sense, because it's so dry. And so if you're going to survive here, you probably need to take advantage of other communities that have better access to agricultural resources. And to do that, you're going to need a military to keep your whole operation together, you know?
Yeah. And so if it's big enough group of people and powerful enough, they can control all the food in this region.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say, well, why didn't the natives just leave? They did when they did when they could.
Yeah.
When it got bad and the drought was so bad that the rulers or the money funders didn't have any more corn to steal from you, they have to, it's all over. And
Yeah.
so, and that's why none of the tribes went anywhere near here. They wanted to escape the whole time.
Well, and it also helps explain, I don't know if it needs explanation, but it does also help explain to some degree why you have a lot of native groups here that are actually cave dwellers. I mean, we've been at a lot of these sites ourselves, right? Cave dwelling sites, and
Yep.
then you'll find these little fortresses built up in these almost inaccessible locations where you can look out and survey your whole valley and see who's coming. I mean, a lot of the cave dwelling communities are in very defensive.
You keep saying cave. It's cliff dwelling.
Sorry, they're caves on cliffs, basically, right? Cliff dwellings, right? So they're all in extremely defensive positions, and so that
Right.
makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, you're utilizing a natural feature of the landscape because there are a lot of natural caves up on cliffs, but it does help make a lot more sense of that type of living.
And they've got it wrong in the beginning. They connected Mesa Verde, which are cliff dwellers, far to the north, away from Chaco. And this is probably a group similar to the cliff dwellers that are in the region of Chaco, which are way smaller communities in very secluded canyons that are growing their own food on a very tiny scale on a creek down at the bottom there. So they are literally hiding from whatever this mechanism is in these fortified areas. And I guess if some of the Chacoan military are able to come out there, they're able to throw rocks down on them. And it's not worth it to just get a few families, you just leave them there.
Right. Right.
So that's probably what's happening. And then up to the north was Mesa Verde, where huge groups of natives that probably got away from here started working together. And again, with the cliff dwelling model, which is very fortified and easily defensive.
Well, and it has an added advantage too. Like all of these cliff dwelling sites are centered around some kind of canyon, right? Where it's going to be wet at the bottom. And so you also have this opportunity to grow your food right there.
Yeah, exactly what's happening. So I think that in the coming years, there's going to be a much clearer picture and connection with the use of Lidar and in putting all of this North American puzzle together.
Yeah.
Because like I said, the earthworks that were discovered in Bolivia are very similar to the earthworks in the Ohio River Valley.
Well, and also this paper talks about, let's say, like the drainage fields in the Apano Valley resemble like drainage fields that are still in use today by people who live in Bolivia and elsewhere. So that's interesting too. I mean, it makes sense that style of growing agriculture is going to continue on, A, because it works, B, because it's something that just jives with the natural landscape perfectly, and something you would need to do for water control, et cetera.
Yeah, and in this image, they're showing the comparison of sites across the world, including the Giza Plateau, this area here, Quilamope in Ecuador, and Teotihuacan in Mexico. All very similar size complexes. It's fascinating. Like this is not an accident.
No.
And that's the prevailing idea that the building of pyramids in Egypt and Mexico are completely random. There's no connection.
Right.
I mean, how is that possible?
Right. And amazingly, we're still scratching our heads about what the purpose of pyramids was in the first place.
Well, the Giza Plateau pyramids clearly are different than the pyramids in Central and South America.
Mhm.
The pyramids that are in the Native American cultures are definitely ceremonial. And we know that like the leader would stand on top and give the talk with his big, plumage on and his giant hat. And
Mhm.
so he would look like a god up there, and he's closer to the gods. So they're literally, personifying a person into godliness through the pyramid. So the pyramids for Native Americans are much different than the original purpose of the pyramids in Giza, which I believe were some type of power generator.
Right.
And for purposes we still don't know.
Right.
I don't think it was to beam a laser to Sirius, which some people claim.
No, I've toyed a lot too with the idea of that this is a technique of using sound energy to accomplish things. That could be the case as well, but that sort of goes in the power generator idea. But then
Yeah,
it still
could have
makes
been some-
sense, even if you're not doing all of that, whatever that is exactly, it still kind of makes some sense to build pyramids in the sense that you were describing it, like being closer to God and appearing large to your people or whatever, just in the sense of like it's kind of like building a skyscraper, but this is much a more practical way of doing it, just because it's going to be solid at the base.
Right, and it's intimidating.
Yeah.
Anyone that can't do this, if they come upon it, is going to be flabbergasted, to say the least.
Yeah.
Just like, oh my God, what is this?
Right.
So pretty interesting. We didn't have a bumper, and so we've rushed into the second half. We've got 20 minutes left. Anything else we want to connect here with this paper? Anything else you want to hit?
I don't think so.
Here's one of those dug roads.
Yeah.
It's like a canal. It certainly looks
I mean,
like a
that's
canal.
going to collect water in this environment, Like, also, here's another problem with this is if that's your road, it doesn't make sense to me from just a practical defensive perspective, because you can't see what's going on around you.
Who's coming? Yeah, you could be
Like, why would
ambushed.
you walk down there? That's a dangerous place to walk. What if there's a flash flood? What if, like, I think about this all the time. If I'm walking in the national forest behind our property in the canyons, which I kind of like doing, but I always think to myself, well, if a mountain lion comes down here, I'm kind of screwed because I'm down in this canyon. It's not the smartest thing to do, and I can't see what's coming.
It clearly, in this larger blow up on the top, looks like it's drainage to prevent from major flooding. It takes the water directly away, out and away.
Yeah, how could you not? How could you not be very focused on water drainage? Because even if you just, in an environment like this, if you dig down, you're going to be hitting water all the time. So for that to be your road doesn't make any sense. You certainly would do this around your agricultural field to keep it from being flooded or have too much water. So why would you not be doing the same thing for your structures, your houses, your buildings, your roads, all of that? So I think they're getting around by canal down here.
Yeah, and it begs to question 2,000 years ago, longer than that. What systems of government or what do they have? What type of planning is going into this? It's mind-boggling.
Well, and then this paper does describe, areas that clearly were residential. So you've got like smaller platforms that are all grouped together, but then you have areas that have much larger platforms where you must have some kind of like civic building. So like if you go back down to that Lidar image there, there's like do you see that circle? Right there. Like, what is that? And then what are those large rectangular, I don't know what those are just below it. So it does describe larger, probably
these
like civic or ceremonial
platforms.
Buildings.
Yeah, so these are massive platforms that something was on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and clearly very similar to the platforms that are from the mound builders in Cahokia.
Yeah.
And so what you would have on top of these is mud and wood structures with reed roofs.
Yeah.
up on the top. It would be where the elites lived, the rulers, the region.
Yeah.
And so they're controlling all this farmland that is in this area, which is like, 50 square miles. And circular structures similar to this are up in all over North America during the Mississippian Pyramid and the Mound Builders.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
well, so maybe considering the environments of the other mound builders site is important, like the amount of moisture that's there. I wonder if this mound building phenomena has a practical perspective to it.
Well, certainly if you leave the area, it will return to Earth and no one will know you're there. That's why many of these mountains just look like hills. And all these areas in the rainforest are unknown because they're right in front of you because they're so overgrown, you can't even tell.
Yeah. Yeah.
So uncovering any of this or making it like a tourist site is going to be all but impossible because of the remote area, the amount of deforestation that would have to occur. And so forever, it will be kept in infamy through LIDAR alone. And I don't think we need to uncover it based on how amazing this paper lays it out.
No.
But the conclusion is there's tens of thousands of people here in a very complex society, thousands of years earlier than anyone thought. No one thought that the Amazon was even, you were able to live in the Amazon in large numbers because the soil is quote unquote infertile.
The soil is infertile?
Yeah.
Why?
Because the way the Amazon jungle utilizes it, I don't have the answer for you right now.
Well,
but it's not suitable for large crop production.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because
there is something, an area in the jungle called the Terra Preta.
Yeah.
You've heard of that?
No.
That is a type of soil that they discovered that they think is manufactured by man. So in order to manufacture huge swaths of farmable soil, the Terra Preta, there must have been tens of thousands of people working on the soil.
Yeah.
And now we have the evidence right here.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, this area has a fair amount of like volcanic material. So that's going to make it rather fertile, right? Because it is kind of next to a volcano, an active one at that.
These societies were permaculturalists living in harmony with nature in abundance, which is why they were able to grow to such sizes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it must have been quite harmonious. There can't be a warring people with this type of extensive agriculture. You need long periods of time to develop this.
Yeah. I mean, just the way the arrangement of everything is described, where you have the drained agricultural fields, and then you have residential areas, and then it's intermixed with these sort of like civic buildings. I mean, it sounds like just a regular, like a well-planned city, right? Where you get the impression of a group of people that are working together to grow their food, and they have some sort of like a public square of sorts, and it makes perfect sense, and it appears to be relatively peaceful. There's a couple of places that are mentioned where you'll have like a mound that was sort of put in place of a road or something that may be defensive, right? So there may be areas in here that are somewhat defensive, but otherwise it seems to be just a relatively peaceful bunch of people living together and growing their food and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and around 600 AD or CE, these areas collapsed. And it's the same time an evil group of very smart agriculturalists make their way up to Chaco.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's more evidence that this culture, somehow a breakaway group that had all this knowledge, went up where there were just some small native tribes up in the Southwest and subjugated them with their amazing knowledge.
Huh.
So they were able to grow food probably in that region by using drainage systems. They knew how to collect the water. They knew how to maximize production. And it probably blew the mind of the natives. And then they all got in this kind of like a slavery model that we live in on Earth, right? People think they're free, but they're not. And so this is like a small version of what's going on today.
Mm-hmm.
You come up and you have to work for the man.
Mhm. I just want to throw out there too, there's also a hypothesis of a major eruption sometime between 4 and 600 in this area.
And that would be coming from Sangay.
Yes, so that could have been playing a factor as well.
Yeah, which is very active today as well.
Yeah.
Okay, anything you want to touch on there?
No, I don't think
Conclusions? I want to finish up with this interesting topic. Oh, well, first, here, let's take a look at this. The mysterious Sajma lines of Bolivia.
so.
Look at them.
Look at that.
It almost looks like the Chaco roadmap.
Yeah, it does. And it looks like you've got, at least in this part of the image, you've got 2 central hubs where roads meet. I bet you could find some kind of urban center there.
Now, these aren't roads. They literally are lines. They're geoglyphs, and they say that they were used as footpaths. I'm like, well, what's the difference between... It's the same thing. Yeah, these were just smaller. They're only 3 meters, 9 feet wide.
Interesting. I mean, of course they're going to say that they're footpaths, right? Because the only other way to really explain this is that it's like the Nazca lines, like something that's meant to be seen from above. And then you're like, well, why? Like, who's up there looking at these?
They're exactly the same as the Chaco roads because, and this is in Bolivia.
Mm-hmm.
So again, the connection that these lines don't make any figures or shapes, but they go on remarkably straight for tens of kilometers. That's the exact description of Chaco roads. And this is the exact, listen to this overlap. Whoever created them worked extremely precisely, which was not an easy task in this hilly terrain with rocks, shrubs, and other obstacles. So the Chaco roads are the same. They go straight up over cliffs. It's unexplainable. Mm-hmm. And this is not. So again, archaeologists would say that there's no connection. It's merely a coincidence.
I mean, like, to me, the existence of all of these roads everywhere, again, it just points to that the idea that people were isolated and didn't know other cultures is completely ridiculous. Like, people were obviously moving around. And when you look at stuff like this, you realize that it doesn't actually look very different than our maps of roads today. It's very similar.
Bingo. All right. So hopefully that blew your mind on the Chaco roads. Now let's finish up in the last 10 minutes here with a common myth. I've got probably 100 emails over the last 2 years asking me to interview David Dubine on his gas giant alignment theory and cooling. I remember him mentioning it like almost a decade ago.
Yeah.
But he's brought it back up and is now a very popular topic with his followers. He's currently in Europe, Hungary. I don't know where he is. He's at some star fort. He was. And I had a quick chat with him. He's going to come on the show and explain it. Okay. But prior to that, I just dove in to some of the science behind planetary alignments. And you probably remember we've had some pretty spectacular alignments in the last few years. We had the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, where it appeared as if they were touching. But is it really dangerous? Are planetary alignments, do they do anything? Do they trigger earthquakes? Right. Do they cause volcanoes to go off? Can they change the climate? What do you think on that topic? Do you have any thoughts on it?
I don't really know. And the reason I say that is because it's not really clear to me. There's so many forces that have to be taken into account potentially. Like, we're talking about potentially gravitational forces. We're maybe talking about electromagnetic forces. And I just don't really know how all of those things interplay with each other. And so I'm very reluctant to come to some sort of conclusion about what might be caused by an alignment like this occurring.
Well, there was a guy, a mathematician. He calculated what if all the planets were to perfectly line up? What would be the effects on Earth? And the result was that if all of the planets and the moon, our moon, aligned as much as they could, and their forces to be added together, the gravity culminates in a plus or minus 0.06% difference. So that would mean it would have a gravitational effect. And if you weighed 90 kilograms and everything lined up, you would weigh 89.94 kilograms. It's similar to going up high on a mountain. You weigh different.
Right.
Well, what they're saying is if all the planets line up, it would be the same as walking up a mountain. So there's no effect.
So that's like absolutely negligible, basically.
And that's it. And this isn't an impossible scenario where everything is lining up.
Right.
All
I mean,
right,
it's not impossible. It's just statistically extremely unlikely.
This article by Jeffrey Kluger in March of last year is amazing because it uses, let me read it. History does not record who the weeping woman was who joined the giant crowd at the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles on February 4th, 1962, but she was inconsolable. I know it's silly to carry on this way, she said, with a hitching breath to a reporter from Griffith Observer magazine, but I can't help myself. Now, the cause of her profound distress, on that day, the sun, the moon, and all 5 non-earthly planets from Mercury to Saturn were aligned in a cosmic conga line with a tiny 17-degree patch of the sky. The alignment foretold terrible things, said many, earthquakes, floods, a devastating rending of the Earth itself from the gravitational pull of so many other bodies at such close range. Now that day, February 4th, 1962, for the record, ended peacefully, as all such things work out when planets align. In fact, not a single major planetary alignment has ever triggered anything but hysteria in humans.
You know, this is going to sound pretty unscientific. However, I'm much more inclined to think that each planet has its own distinct energy, like in the sense of like a more spiritual energy. And I'm much more inclined to believe that a planetary alignment has spiritual consequences rather than very physical ones. Again, that does not sound scientific in any way, shape, or form. I can't prove that. I can't explain it, but that's what I'm inclined to think.
Well, there's a direct connection between longevity and the date you were born on the solar cycle.
Sure.
So if you were born during solar minimum, you have a very high chance of living to 90.
Right.
If you were born during a solar max, you have a very high chance of getting hit by a bus while texting.
Right. Well, and I should say perhaps it's more than just spiritual energy. Like there may be like a physical component to that as well, sort of as you're kind of alluding to here.
Now, yeah, and there is some problems with this before we end the show, which is coming up here. They're using the standard model of cosmology. So they're only calculating gravitational effects in a gravitational solar system. They're not accounting for electrical connections through Birkeland currents.
Right.
And that's the spiritual side. Because we're all energetic.
Yes.
Now, and there is also the misconception that planets are somehow near each other or that lining them up at all means anything. When in fact,
I was laughing at this phrase here, the gravitational pull of so many other bodies at such close range. They're not in close range. Yeah. They might be lining up, but they're not close to each other at all.
Right. And the alignment is, of course, also an illusion. And we can only see it here at Earth, and it's millions of miles away. Right. The planets are separated by tens and hundreds of millions of miles in some cases.
Yeah.
Hundreds of millions of miles. Mercury and Uranus, which will appear to be getting close together sometimes, for instance, are actually 1.75 billion miles apart.
Yeah.
So even if there's an electrical effect, it's minimal.
Yeah. It is just a matter of perspective in the end.
And so major alignments have happened back in the 70s and the 80s when 4 gas giants, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, formed a tidy and temporary rank in a perfect line in deep space, which actually allowed Voyager 2 to fly by all 4 of them as it was racing out of our solar system.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, that would have been impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So modern astronomy notwithstanding, you'd have to go back to the ancients to find people on whom planetary alignments have had much the same distressing effect they had on the woman at Griffith Observatory 61 years ago. But yet it continues today. Widespread rumors that, here's funny, there are the dire predictions in the last century. In 1919, when a similar alignment of planets led to widespread rumors that the phenomenon would lead to a rash of sunspots, which would cause worldwide destruction at a scientifically sounding precise moment, December 17th, 8:31 a.m., 1919.
You know what's funny? What might be the strongest correlation for these alignments is people getting hysterical. So maybe it does have an effect on us.
The rumor also had it that the existing sunspots, along with the pernicious influence of Jupiter, were responsible for the 1918 flu pandemic.
Oh.
So don't worry about the alignments, folks, and watch us tonight on Magnetic Reversal News.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.